going on, people? Welcome to United View and welcome to the Tactical View. We've been missing for a week, and as you'll see, there is no Owen, no flex, suspension and injury crisis here at United View, but it's all right, I'm still here, so let's get on with the show. So obviously a great win for United against Crystal Palace. We'll first start off by taking a little look at the Palace team, as we normally tend to do, and straight away you see there's not a lot of quality there. I think the only real threat here is Elise. Obviously scored an absolute worldly free kick in the last minute of the other game at Selhurst Park. And he is probably one player from Palace that I would love to have at Manchester United. Brilliant dribbler, fantastic sort of creative player, and he'd be a brilliant asset to the United squad, particularly as a sort of replacement for Anthony on that right side, an understudy or a different type of option to what he brings. Outside of that, I think really the important things to note are just the work rate of Will Hughes, Decore and Jeff Schlupp in particular. They're sort of players that work really hard, even if they don't have that much threat going forward. And obviously Will Hughes, yeah, in terms of that video with the Casemiro thing, there's been a little bit of bad reaction, and he deserves every little bit of it because he's made a meal of it for absolutely no reason. And yep, I hope he gets relegated at some point soon. On to the sort of match-up between the United and Palace teams. In terms of what happened, now you have to remember the point of where United are now is that we have struck such fear into opposition teams from the way that Erik ten Hag's got us playing, that teams cannot come and sit in a low block because they know over 90 minutes they are going to get broken down. That is a guarantee. Right, on to what happened in terms of the matchup between United and Palace. We've got the board loaded in, and what you've got to know is that the fear that Erik ten Hag has struck into opposition teams is so great now that teams know if you press United high, Marcus Rashford's going to be a threat in behind, Anthony's going to be a threat in behind, and you will get killed on the break. Balls will go in behind constantly, and these guys will put it past you. So you can't do that. That's not an option. You can't press high. And teams know as well that if they're going to sit in a low block, which is the alternative to pressing high, then they're going to have to be really, really disciplined and have all 11 players behind the ball, which means they can't just simply leave 2 or 3 players up the pitch, and they have to get back into a defensive shape and be really narrow and compact. So what happens is this: the players drop deeper and deeper and deeper. And what that means for United is that we can push players higher and higher up the pitch, knowing that we're unlikely to get caught on the counter. And what I like with where Ten Hag is now is that we've got such a good structure that when we're in possession, what we see is this. We see Varane, we see Lisandro Martinez pushing right up on the halfway line, sometimes even higher, because defensive teams know they can't just leave players high up the pitch. They need every single player back defending. So as Odsonne Edouard here, the Palace striker, drops in deeper and deeper and deeper, he's got to be able to sort of put some pressure on Martinez and Varane, so he can't just sort of stay high and wait for the counter. He's got to come back towards his own goal. And what that means is, what we can do is we can drop into or create a 2-3-5 type shape. So I'm going to illustrate now what happens. And what we often see is that we see Anthony holding the width one side, we see Rashford holding the width the other side, and we see sort of Wan-Bissaka underlapping, sort of tucking in here, Casemiro dropping in here, Fernandes pushing on, and we've got Fred on this side here. So sometimes it'll be Luke Shaw in field, sometimes it'll be Fred. But the idea here is we create a 2-3-5 structure. So what we've got is Martinez and Varane there, back there. That's the sort of 2 defensive 2 there. And what they've got between them is fantastic ability to sort of just circulate the ball on Varane's side. He very rarely gives the ball away. And when it goes to Martinez, he's obviously a fantastic line-breaking passer, meaning that he's basically a midfielder here. You have to put some pressure on him, otherwise he will just find balls through the lines. Now, the interesting bit in terms of this 2-3-5 structure is the way that it breaks low blocks. And what is so brilliant about it is that because you've got touchline wingers here, Anthony and Rashford are very capable of being right on the touchlines there, is that it forces this defensive line to be stretched. So as soon as that ball goes out one side, sort of Klein's got to get out really quickly, and that means there's a big gap in here between sort of Klein and Richards, and that then gives a space for Bruno Fernandes to tuck in, and you've got Fred going in there. And as soon as you've got runs, so Rashford's on the ball here, you'll always see Luke Shaw or Fred making a run in there into that sort of space, and that causes all sorts of problems because the defending team just have to get more players further and further back, closer to their own goal. So it makes it really, really hard for any defending team to play against. Now, the other interesting thing that we've got here is that because in this 2-3-5, you often end up with Wan-Bissaka and Luke Shaw sort of tucking into this line with Casemiro. So you've got the 2 there. In front of them, you've got this 3 here. You've got Wan-Bissaka, Casemiro, Luke Shaw. Sometimes it'll be Fred that tucks in here. Sometimes it's Shaw. But let's say for the purposes of this, it's Shaw now. What this does is that because you've got these three players here, it's outnumbering the opposition's midfield. So as well as having players here to stretch the last line of the opposition, these guys being in here means that the opposition midfield can't just go wide and double up with their fullback. They've got to stay narrow, otherwise we've got a numerical overload here. We can pop the ball round and eventually we'll find Bruno Fernandes or Wout Weghorst in some sort of space. So what it's doing, in terms of the structure that Ten Hag's built here, is that we're holding the opposition midfield as narrow as possible, whilst making their defence stretch as wide as possible. So the idea here is that we cause them problems in every area of the pitch. So because the midfield have to stay narrow, this prevents them, the opposition sort of wingers, tucking in and doubling up with the fullbacks until right at the last second. So if we can get the ball out to Antony or Rashford, they're both players that like to cut inside. And that is why it's so important for United now that we've got Antony with that left-footed dynamics. He starts wide, but he's a threat on the inside there. Now, in terms of defending the inside shoulder, obviously most fullbacks, particularly on that left side here, are going to be left-footed. So they're going to be, in general, pretty competent at defending the outside there. Whereas, on the inside here, what they're going to need, if Antony's cutting in, is they're going to need some support inside them. Now, as soon as that ball goes out to Antony, in terms of support inside, he'll have Schlupp there, he might have Marc Guehi there, might have Will Hughes tucking across. But as soon as you draw some players in there, you've got these players inside, you've got that numerical advantage there because players have come across. United have got Wan-Bissaka, we've got Casemiro, we've got Shaw or Fred in that area. We're able to pop it round teams, and if we can retain the ball, keep it, make a few passes, we're able to create great moments like we saw for that second goal where we've drawn players in. I think it was Garnacho somewhere in this sort of area. He's drawn players in, a few nice passes, played it around the edge of the box, and because players have been drawn in here, Luke Shaw on the overlap here was able to get into a good position, cut back, and Rashford's able to finish. But where that all comes from is the fantastic structure that United have now got under Ten Hag. So we're threatening teams all over the pitch. What I want to mention here in terms of that structure is the triangles that we see either side. So in the tactical view after, I think before and after Arsenal, what we talked about quite a bit was the way Arsenal create triangles either side with, for them it'll be Xhaka, it'll be Zinchenko and it'll be Martinelli. Whereas for United here, particularly on this left side, what we see at the moment is you've got this Shaw, Rashford, Fred triangle, where all three of them are very comfortable in any position. So at times you'll see either Rashford will be right on the wing and you'll have in this half space here, it'll be Fred offering the threat on the inside. Sometimes it'll be Fred a little bit deeper in this position where Shaw is. Shaw will be in the inside. And at other times, when we want maybe a more natural crossing angle, Rashford obviously likes to threaten inside here, so he's more than comfortable receiving in these half space areas. Luke Shaw can receive a bit wider, and obviously with his left foot, he can stay right on the touchline and provide a threat from outside rather than a threat that wants to cut in. Then you've got Fred deeper there. And what that means is for that defence, because we're holding the midfield nice and narrow, it basically guarantees us a 3v2 all the time in those wide areas. Because if Klein's there, Ayew can come back in. But Doucouré, Will Hughes, they can't shift too far across because you've got Bruno Fernandes here, you've got the inverted fullback on the opposite side, you've got Casemiro. So if they start shifting too far across, we simply bring the ball back across, and you get Bruno Fernandes in those positions, you're going to have something happen. He's going to be able to create something. So it's really important that the 3v2 that we make there is sort of augmented by another sort of overload in this central area. Now, one thing that we've seen so many times in recent years, tactically, sort of a lot last season under Ralf Rangnick, quite a lot under Ole Gunnar Solskjaer in previous years, is that the striker here is we've often seen them just sort of drifting out wide left, basically holding hands with the left winger because the left winger hasn't always been in the best of form. Particularly last year, if Rashford was not in his best form, not at the top of his game, it's been the case that whoever's playing striker, whether it's Martial or whoever else, has had to come out here as well to sort of provide overloads on that side to make us sort of help us to be able to progress the play down that wing. Now with Wout Weghorst and the form Rashford's in, form Luke Shaw's in, form Fred's in, that isn't needed anymore. We've got this 3v2 and we can trust that they'll all be able to draw and pass, find the spare man and create some sort of chance from that area. So it means that Weghorst can stay central. And what that means in turn is that these centre-backs have to be worried about him because obviously if there's a cross that comes in, Weghorst is what, 6'6", 6'7", he's going to beat anyone in the air. So the centre-backs, because Weghorst is staying here, they have to stay here. And that means this gap between the centre-back and the full-back is then open for whichever one of the players is in the half space here. Whether that's Rashford, whether that's Luke Shaw, whether that's Fred. And the fluidity means that there's all sorts of different problems for the defence because each of these three players have got different skill sets. They receive and sort of play on the half-turn in different ways. And in particular, I want to highlight something that Rashford's improved on a hell of a lot recently. The goal against Wolves that he scored, where he sort of bounced past 2 or 3 players, the upper body strength that he showed there is a fantastic example of how much he's improved in recent seasons. Because last year, realistically, last year at times you put him in a one-on-one and he'll probably second guess himself and lose the ball. Now you put him against 2 or 3 players, you know that even if he doesn't beat them sort of cleanly with his footwork and his skills, you know he's going to be able to just get past them with his sheer upper body strength. He'll burst past people, he'll keep going, and he'll get in the right position to score or create a chance at the end of it. So that has been crucial for United. The last thing I want to talk about in terms of the structure that we've got here is something called rest defence. And what is so important about that is that it means that United can sustain our attacks. So with these inverted fullbacks in these areas, or whether it's Fred, whether it's, you might even see Bruno in this area with Wan-Bissaka a little bit wider, what we've got is this sort of bowl-shaped structure around the opposition. So if I just get rid of these sort of lines that we've got earlier, what we've got at all times is, because we've got so many players that are able to push high up the pitch because teams fear us, what it gives us is we've got that Varane, Martinez, we've got sort of, I guess, yeah, we'll do that to Anthony there. We've got this sort of shape like this, meaning that as soon as any attack happens for United, we get a ball into the box, however many players we can get on the end of it. Let's say we get Bruno in the box, we get Rashford in the box, we get Wan-Bissaka in the box, we get a lot of players in the box, and we can do that because of the fear we've struck into teams. They're not leaving that many players up front. But even if that ball gets cleared, unless it is a perfect clearance, which met with a perfectly timed run from Edouard into the channels, which even then, Varane's quick in a race, you're not going to beat him. Martinez is aggressive. Because of this bowl-shaped structure that we've got, any clearance is going to be hoovered up straight away by a United player. So what it means is we get wave after wave after wave of attack because of this structure that Ten Hag's implemented. So in terms of the fear that it strikes into oppositions, because they know we're good technically, they know we're going to break them down over 90 minutes, they've got to sit deeper and deeper and deeper, meaning we can push more and more and more players into the box. Indeed, I mean, at times when Edouard's dropping off towards his own goal, you see Varane and Martinez 10, 15 yards into the opposition half. Now, obviously, it may look a bit congested, me sort of showing this situation where United are really high up the pitch, but this is the reality of what's happening in games now, because teams are so scared that we're going to break through them. They have to sit so close towards their own goal. United can get so many players high up the pitch, and anytime an opposition player clears it, straight back into it, another wave of attack, and it is relentless. And for 70 minutes against Crystal Palace, we saw that. We saw a relentless wave after wave after wave of brilliant attack from United. And players look sharp, and look, when you put good players in a good structure, in good form, and they execute things well technically, you get brilliant goals like that second goal that we scored. So that was the story of the first 70 minutes, but at some point, when a team's losing, they're going to make changes. And that's why Erik ten Hag decided that to preempt what Palace were going to do, he would bring Marcus Rashford up front and bring Alejandro Garnacho onto the left in place of Wout Weghorst. So the thinking behind that was fairly simple, to be honest. As Palace push higher and higher up the pitch, you get Rashford through the middle, you get Alejandro Garnacho onto the pitch on the left side, there we go, and you get Wout Weghorst off the pitch, just simply to get pace up the pitch, get Rashford running in behind, push the defence back, and stop any chance Palace have of building some momentum, trying to get a fight back. But then the game changed. Casemiro got himself sent off, for reasons that, to be honest, only the VAR will know. Definitely did not deserve a red card there, to be honest. And Will Hughes definitely made the most of what happened. I had no idea how Andre Ayew didn't get sent off as well. But anyway, after that, the game had changed completely. The momentum had completely swung, and Ten Hag had to make some more changes. And to be honest, I thought he did a pretty good job with the changes he made. At this point, he dropped sort of United. Obviously, Bruno Fernandes dropped a little bit deeper into midfield alongside Fred for a little bit. And then towards the end of the game, as things were going on, what he had to do, the two key changes he made, were getting Harry Maguire on for Anthony. Where is Harry Maguire? Number 5. And he also brought on Victor Lindelof for Aaron Wan-Bissaka. So Maguire makes sense sort of straight away in terms of why you bring him on, in terms of Palace were getting a hell of a lot of crosses in there. Down the sides, they had a lot of success with Ayew, Schlupp, Mitchell and Eze came on as well. They had a lot of success in terms of getting down the sides, getting crosses, getting balls into the box. And obviously, as United fans, we know David De Gea is not going to catch those crosses. So you're going to have a lot of central defenders, a lot of height in the team to make sure you head that ball away before the Palace players can get close. And unfortunately, they did score from 1. So at that point, we're down to 10 men. It's 2-1. The momentum is all with Crystal Palace. So things are not looking great right then. So the other sub Erik ten Hag made was the introduction for his debut of Marcel Sabitzer. On he comes here in place of Anthony, should be off the pitch. There we go. And what happened here, the formation United dropped into here, this 5-2-5-3-1 as it sort of panned out, with Garnacho eventually going off the pitch as well, meant that these three in midfield had to do a hell of a lot of runs. These guys had to be monsters in terms of the work rate they got through, because three players is not enough to defend the entire width of the pitch. And the reason that they had to do that is because Palace was just getting higher and higher up. And whereas in the first half, so the first 70 minutes, United were having our players sort of 10, 15 yards inside the Palace half, our centre-backs, Varane and Martinez. The Palace players were camped on the halfway line there, the centre-backs. And so every wave after wave of attack, every wave that they had was getting cleared straight to a Palace player, and it was just coming straight back. And what that meant was that sort of Klein and Ayew were getting all sorts of joy with this back five of United being pushed deeper and deeper and deeper. So that substitution, Wan-Bissaka off for Victor Lindelof. Why would you take off your right back, who's done a pretty good job all game, when you're sort of facing a lot of crosses, a lot of threat from wide areas, for somebody that's not quite so good in those wide areas in Victor Lindelof? Well, the answer is pretty simple as it happens. And Wan-Bissaka, for all his improvement in recent weeks, his one glaring weakness in his game is he cannot defend the back post. So as soon as Palace get down the right side, they stick a cross on the back post. You know De Gea is not going to claim it. Yes, you've got Harry Maguire there, but Wan-Bissaka is not good enough defending that back post. Just the one glaring weakness in his game. He's not sort of spatially aware enough. He doesn't get up sort of in the air quick enough, doesn't jump well enough to defend the back post. So that's why he had to bring on Victor Lindelof. Yes, you lose something in the wide areas in terms of if Lindelof's coming out here to confront Mitchell or Schlupp or Eze, whoever it was in the wide areas, he's not going to be quite as good 1v1, but that is massively paid off by defending the box, which is what's important when you're you're facing a constant barrage of crosses from Palace. So that's what was really important there. And in terms of this midfield three, because they were facing wave after wave from Palace, the ball was getting to the Palace centre-backs and they're straight away playing it out one side or down the other. And because United's players are pinned so far back in that back five, these midfielders have to get through an insanely large amount of work. Every single time that ball goes out there, Fred was getting out quickly, Sabitzer was getting out quickly, Bruno was getting out quickly down this side. And for three players, as I said, to cover the width of the pitch, they have to be absolute physical monsters. Do not underestimate the work those guys have got through. And if there is anything in recent times that has shown me that it's 100% worth Manchester United keeping Fred in this squad, it's games like that. Because there are very few players that can pull off that work rate that Fred did, that Sabitzer did, that Bruno Fernandes did. Look, you can talk for ages about the technical qualities of someone like Matic, of Paul Pogba, of Christian Eriksen, but if we had a midfield three of those three, we lose that game because they don't get through anywhere near as much work. And fundamentally, as much as football is about brilliant technical quality, about passing, attacking movement, all that sort of stuff, at its core, football's a running game and you need players in your team that can run. And ultimately, those guys did a fantastic job of it. So fair enough to them, brilliantly played. And Marcel Sabitzer had a fantastic introduction. He came in a high pressure situation, played really well on his debut. And let's get into talking a little bit more about what Marcel Sabitzer can bring to Manchester United. So in terms of statistically comparing him to Eriksen, since he's sort of mainly a replacement for Christian Eriksen in that defensive midfield role, probably going to be playing a lot alongside Fred and Casemiro. First off, we start with a sort of comparison of their attacking output, what they sort of do in the final third, that sort of stuff. And as you can see, in terms of the assist side of things, expected assists, Eriksen has been absolutely, utterly brilliant for United this season. So in this first column, you've got the sort of raw numbers per 90, and the second column here is that how they rank to the other midfielders in the top 5 leagues in Europe. So what you can see here is Eriksen is better than 99% of midfielders for the amount of assists he's got per 90. That's the impact he's had for United this season. And if you look at Sabitzer in comparison, he does all right in terms of assists. But it's this goals area here where he's actually got a lot in the locker, probably even more so than what Eriksen's got. In terms of volume of shots, Sabitzer's fantastic, gets a lot of shots off. And what a lot of people have said, who've watched a lot of Sabitzer, is that he's got a fantastic shooting technique. He's a brilliant ball striker at set pieces, and sort of when he gets chance on the edge of the box, he has sort of very minimal backlift, which helps him to get shots off quite quickly, and it's quite useful for playing long switches of play as well, off both feet, and he's got very, very good shooting technique when he gets into those positions. So in that sense, he's probably offering something that Eriksen doesn't necessarily in terms of direct goal threat, and we're not losing too much in terms of the assists and the passing side of things. So in terms of the passing side of things, we'll come on now to the pure passing stats. And what you can see here is that in terms of, obviously, pass completion, that surprised me a hell of a lot, actually. Eriksen's pass completion percentage his percentile, he's only in the 26th percentile. So he's only better than 25% of midfielders in Europe in terms of pass completion. But obviously with that stat, you've got to bear in mind that all midfielders are being asked to do different things. If Eriksen's constantly being asked to play long passes, progressive passes through the lines, obviously that's going to be a bit lower than someone that passes sort of backwards and sideways a lot. So I'd imagine Scott McTominay's pass completion will be fairly high because he's not always playing passes forward, he's playing a lot of backwards and sideways passes. So that's always something to bear in mind with stats like that. In terms of ball progression, which is one of the main things that Eriksen brings to Manchester United at the moment, you look here, progressive passes, he's in the 90th percentile, so he's better than 89% of midfielders in the top 5 leagues. That is why Eriksen's of such value to this United team. And if you look at Sabitzer, he still ranks pretty highly in terms of 6.32 progressive passes per 90, 7.53 for Eriksen. In terms of carries, again, Sabitzer's probably not the sort of ball-carrying midfielder that United are so desperate for. We'll come on to that a little bit later on in terms of potential transfer targets, but he still does a decent amount there. What's also interesting to see here is the touches in the attacking penalty area and the progressive passes received by Sabitzer. So what that means, what a progressive pass is, if you don't know, is it's when the ball is moved at least 10 yards closer to the opposition goal. So the idea there is obviously if you're constantly moving the ball closer to the opposition goal, you're more likely to be useful to your team when they're going forward in terms of building attacks, in terms of getting shots off, and in terms of scoring goals. So obviously the more you can pull off as a progressive passer and carrier, the better you are at moving that ball closer to the opposition's goal. But also, the more progressive passes you can receive, that suggests that you're better at getting forward, getting into good pockets between the lines potentially, and good places where you can actually get some attacking returns. So what you can see here from Sabitzer is he's pretty good in terms of getting lots of touches in the attacking penalty area, so he's likely to be able to get into good goal-scoring positions, and he also receives a lot of progressive passes as well. So he's the sort of player that other teammates can pick out in forward areas. So that's probably something that Eriksen isn't doing too much. Now, that isn't necessarily because Eriksen isn't good enough to receive the ball on the half-turn and get into those areas. I think, for me, that's more to do with Sabitzer's brilliant engine. He's a fantastic player in terms of covering ground, work rate, and he's able to work back quickly, which means he can get forward, knowing that he's got that in his locker to track back if he needs to, whereas Eriksen at this point in his career isn't quite as mobile. Finally then, this is the sort of the jewel in the crown for Sabitzer, what he can bring to this team that Eriksen absolutely cannot bring, and that is the defensive side of the game. Now, this shocked me. Eriksen, in terms of tackles per 90, for someone that sits in that double pivot, yes, he's playing alongside Casemiro, who is a defensive monster, but 2%. Eriksen's in the 2nd percentile. 98% of midfielders in the top 5 leagues across Europe pull off more tackles per 90 than Christian Eriksen does. Now, obviously, you can say United probably keep more possession than most teams, but still, that is horrendous numbers. That is really, really bad. Interceptions follows a similar story. Blocks, to be fair, he does all right. But aerial duels as well, not the best. You look at Sabitzer on the other hand, tackles, interceptions, clearances, aerial duels won, fantastic. Levels above Christian Eriksen, and that all comes from his work rate, it comes from his intelligence. And look, the thing with Sabitzer is that he's been educated in the Red Bull style of football. So what you get a lot of from him, as you see in sort of the progressive passing stats, you get a lot of verticality. He's not so interested in sort of playing sideways passes, backwards passes. The Red Bull mentality is very much get the ball, go forward, be direct, get in the box. When you lose the ball, straight on it on the counter press. If you can counter press quickly, do it, get after your man, try and win that ball back. If you can't, drop back into shape really quickly and be ready for that defensive phase. So that's what you get from Sabitzer that you do not get from Christian Eriksen at all. This defensive side of the game is why, actually, it could be an upgrade having Sabitzer, particularly in some of the big games where we need to be better at covering ground. Now, what I wanted to talk about now is in terms of midfielders, I've got a little graph here in terms of what Sabitzer can offer compared to some of our other options, and also in the top right, almost in a different galaxy. I like the sort of starry night sky sort of backdrop we've got here. Pretty much in a different galaxy to everybody else. Frankie de Jong there in terms of his ball carrying, in terms of his progressive passing distance. Now this is why Erik ten Hag's desperate for de Jong and why Manchester United are so desperate for a ball carrying midfielder. Because look, this is where our current midfielders rank. So obviously with Christian Eriksen out, if Scott McTominay comes in here, you're losing. That is how much progression you're losing in terms of passing. That is a hell of a lot. And in terms of carrying, which is sort of how high up the graph you are, again, McTominay is nowhere near the likes of Fred, Bruno or Eriksen, and Sabitzer is a lot closer to Eriksen in terms of profile. So this is why United wanted Sabitzer over a lot of the other options that are available, because he's fairly close to Eriksen in terms of profile, provides a lot of ball progression through passes and through carrying, and compared to Scott McTominay, there is just no comparison. Let's be honest, I like Scott McTominay, but there's no comparison. In terms of Matheus Nunes here, why I've got him, he's been a name that United have been linked with in terms of we need a ball-carrying midfielder desperately, because at times when sort of games are getting tough, you're under the cosh a bit, you need a player that, if the passing our way out of trouble isn't working, you need a player that can sort of dribble past 4, 5, 6 players, take the ball up the pitch, draw fouls. Matheus Nunes, ball carrying wise, especially in a Wolves team that don't have that much of the ball, aren't playing that well, look how much better his numbers are than every other midfielder we've got at the moment. So he's potentially a good option. Obviously his ball progression from passing isn't great, but then again he's playing in a Wolves team that isn't the best at the moment, so he's not necessarily got that many options ahead of the ball to progress it. So maybe the United team, that will improve. But the point I wanted to get out of this is, look, Sabitzer versus McTominay is a massive, massive step up. It's a fantastic signing that Manchester United have made. I'm really excited for the rest of the season, because I think he's not just a good option for the rest of this season, but I think if we can get him on a permanent deal, he'd be a brilliant addition to the United squad. And then we can let someone like McTominay go. And obviously with his homegrown quota that he probably ticks the box for, he can go to other teams for a little bit more money, and that can be reinvested into hopefully better players. That's it for this week, guys. Hopefully you've enjoyed it in terms of talking about Sabitzer. We've broken down how United are able to sort of threaten teams like Crystal Palace, the 2-3-5 system that we now employ that gives us brilliant protection in terms of counter-attacks and strikes fear into the heart of pretty much any team in the land. That's 13 games unbeaten for United at Old Trafford. Erik ten Hag is building something special. Hope you enjoyed the video. Drop your thoughts in the comments down below. Don't forget to like, smash that subscribe button, and of course, share the video to your friends as well. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you all next week, hopefully with a return from suspension of Flex and/or Owen.